Welcome to Wisdom, Whiskey, and Wit, where leadership is distilled, wisdom is shared, and stories are worth savoring. I'm your host, Starsky Smith. Today we pour a glass of Four Rose and sit down with Jose Vasquez, a financial professional turned entrepreneur, to talk about what it really takes to buy a business and lead one. From seller financing to parenting as a leadership training, we unpack the raw lessons that come from stepping out of the boardroom and into ownership. Jose shares what it means to value a business, not just on paper, but in purpose. Because the numbers matter, but so does the why. Is the business solving a real problem? Does it align with your values? Does it give you energy or just an income? Purpose is the difference between buying a job and building a legacy. If you've ever considered walking away from the corporate career, or wondering what it would take to lead something of your own, this episode is for you. So on this episode, we are going to drink Four Rose small batch. Jose, I believe you have a bottle that I sent you over there, some Four Rose small batch. All righty. So I don't know if you know this, but this was founded back in 1888. And it actually a love story. So this guy asked the girl to supposedly marry him, and there was a Four Rose corsage, and that just kind of became the thing. And he made whiskey, bourbon in Kentucky. So I don't know.
Okay.
It's on their website. I thought that was very interesting compared to everything else. I was like, oh, this is a love story. This is kind of funny. But
Nice.
all right, let's open this bad boy
All
up.
right.
It's a steep pour there.
See, I've got to have a couple
All
rocks
right.
in my glass.
It's all right. All right. Well, cheers.
Cheers, my friend.
That's good. That's a little different. So,
I got a
man,
feeling that's not going to be my only one.
Probably not. Not on this episode. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Yeah, man. Let me get started. First of all, Starsky, I just want to thank you for having me on. It really is an honor. I think being part of the Vertical Motion Group, there's somebody that newer members can look to as an example that this works, and I think your willingness to speak out about leadership is it's super cool. It's something that everybody can learn from, regardless of the stage they're in. I'm very appreciative of you having me on your platform here.
Not a problem.
But yeah, my name is Jose Vasquez. I'm from the city of Chicago. Spent most of my career working in finance. The earlier part of it was in retail banking. At some point, I started working for a financial services startup. We did like construction lending for residential real estate. I was the 10th employee there. We grew quite a bit. After 7 years, I left to become the head of technology at a tax prep firm. They handled international taxes for like U.S. expatriates. After that, I went to got the itch to really start my own business, but I thought I can shortcut a lot of the process by buying my own business. So I did that for a couple of years where I bought into and then sold out of a couple of businesses. And I've also worked in digital analytics.
That's interesting. So you bought into businesses? How was that? How's that work?
The shorter version of it, and we can expand on this, but the main principle there was just that, I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur. While working at the international, like the tax prep firm, was laid off. This was during the pandemic. They ended up cutting their entire leadership team and making some cuts there. And I started thinking about what the next chapter was going to look like. And I was, I'd gone on a couple of job interviews, and I just couldn't shake the thought that I felt like I was begging for somebody else to allow me to feed my family. Which, to be honest with you, I don't know if I feel that way now, but I think it was at the time a very powerful thought, and it wasn't one that I could shake. So I started mapping out different processes. What would it look like if I started a business? What would it look like if I bought a business? And I kept planning on the idea of buying one that was already existing because it already had stuff working. I was already making money. I didn't have to go through that entire phase of figuring out what works and just make what's already working better. And I really thought that was a better fit for my skill set because I'd worked in the whole startup environment, but I didn't start that, right? I just helped it take it to the next level. So I was more confident I could do that with something else that I purchased on my own.
And because you've worked kind of in the corporate world, and how does leadership differ from, I would say, in the corporate world to the startup world or buying a business? How does that differ? Because some people might not know.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and especially if you're working for larger companies, a lot of the executives, a lot of the managers receive similar trainings. You're gonna see a little bit more polish, right? When you're buying these businesses, there's a little bit less polish. Oftentimes, you're buying it from people that have like that was all they did was run their business, and they had to learn leadership on their own. There's a lot less executive training and a lot more of trial and error. And some people really get it right, and they're amazing at it. And some people don't, right? And so I would say, like, you coming from a military background, the leaders that you've worked with and that you served with, um, there was a lot of structure around them to become good leaders. And that just doesn't exist in a lot of businesses, especially if you're starting it yourself, or if you're running it yourself. So if you are going to be a great leader, you have to seek out that development.
I definitely see that gap in the corporate world is where there isn't a lot of structure. And I can see how that could be in the entrepreneur space, that there is not a lot of structure with that. That's why I think vets are very keen to come in and take leadership positions in corporate America because of kind of that discipline and background that they have. So what are some of the leadership lessons you learned when you were in corporate America that you've kind of pulled over into helping you with your businesses that you're doing now?
Yeah, so leadership lessons that I've learned in corporate America is, I tell you, like one of the main ones is that you don't have to take everything from anybody, right? So like I've worked with leaders that I really admired for specific reasons. Really hated working with them for other reasons, right? So you can kind of take the good with the bad, and over time, over many years of working with many people, you start to build out your perfect leader looks like. And then at least in my case, I've tried to emulate that to the extent I can.
Yeah. Who would you say in your early career was a great mentor for you?
I would say one of my early mentors was a guy named Raymond Gangarosa. He's the COO of the lending company I used to work for. And man, the guy, he just has so much grit and determination, and like he's one of those guys that can just run through a brick wall if you get it in his way, right?
Yeah.
And so like that was a guy I was very lucky. I met him when we were both early in our careers. We both grew together for a long time, and he's somebody that to this day I look to as an example of somebody that I want to be more like every day.
And who would you say has the biggest influence on your life now when you look at leadership?
When I look at leadership, was an interesting caveat because definitely my son has the biggest influence on my life. He's a 3-year-old and he takes over everything. But if we're talking leadership, I think in the season I'm in, Tom Cox is absolutely the mentor I think of first when I'm thinking about
Mhm.
what he has built at Vertical Motion. And yeah, I know you've talked about this in the past, but it's an incredible thing. The community is great. His feedback specifically is great. The coaches he's built within the program are great. And I've not only experienced a shift in my mindset in working with them, but I've seen it across the community, and it's really amazing to see.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting group of cohorts or people because we come from all different walks of life. I find it funny because I never really want to talk to HR. I have to talk to HR because of my job, but like I don't ever really want to talk to them. But like I've spoke to some HR professionals in our group and they're phenomenal people. Granted they've got to do some, have tough conversations and stuff like that and do stuff that I don't want to do. So, but no, there's definitely different sides of people and seeing that. And it's always funny when we have calls and stuff like that, see the people that aren't always so stuffy, they crack jokes. They actually let their hair down once in a while in the group. So no, that's stuff's definitely, I think that being a leader is not always about being right or being right. It's about knowing when you're wrong and being able to turn that. I always try to make fun of myself when I make mistakes, which kind of makes it lighthearted. But yeah, definitely. So I always see you on, I know you're on all these different platforms and you're always doing this, is it a coaching business or like, what does that, what are you really doing there? Like, cause you're telling people about all these opportunities, these recession proof businesses they could buy and stuff like that. And I'm very intrigued as a layman on that piece of the business of buying a business, so like I don't have to work. Could you explain that in depth to me, man? So
Yeah,
I know
that
you got a lot of people excited in Vertical Motion, but like I'm like, I just want to hear a little more.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? So like I've bought several businesses now and I've helped people on that same journey. And the thing is it can somewhat part of it is academic. You can learn how to buy a business from reading about it and watching YouTube videos and there's just a lot of education out there, but it's only going to take you so far, right? The reality is when boots hit the ground that your situation is going to be unique in a lot of regards, right? I can walk through how to review a balance sheet or whatever, right? Like all of those things I can teach from an academic standpoint, but when you're looking at a very specific business in a very specific situation in a very specific point in time, everything seems to change, right? Like so you need specific advice. You need somebody who can like weigh in on things as they're happening, and that's kind of where I come in. So number
All right.
one, I can work with people to learn the process as like at a very high level and help them walk that path, right? So it took me several years to learn how to do this business. I can teach you that part of it in, several hours, basically, right? That part isn't that hard. Where it really gets hard is when you actually start negotiating the deals, right? Like, how do I talk to a broker in a way that's not they're not going to ghost me, right? Or when I get this information, how do I know if any of these numbers are even fair? Was it okay that the seller added back their salary in this case, or is this expense a really one-time expense, right? And the thing is, there isn't any amount of watching YouTube videos that's going to teach you how to react in that moment, right? So what I try to do is help people in those moments when things get really hard by guiding them using the experiences I've had in the past.
Okay. And so do you do that as a consultant, or is that what you're doing? You're consulting for them?
Essentially, yeah, that's exactly right. I'm not going to I'm not going to necessarily like hold your hand through the entire process, right? Like I'm not going to be the ones reaching out to the brokers. What I'm going to do is weigh in on every single decision that you'd like me to, right? We usually start by figuring out what your buy box looks like. What kind of industries make sense for you, given your network, given your experience, given your financial capabilities, right? So we start mapping out what that perfect business looks like. And from there, you're basically able to build your search criteria. Once you know what you're looking for, it's just a matter of going and finding it. Then once you start finding businesses, so there's a lot of platforms online you can go on. It's very beginner friendly that you can start getting business listings from. And what I'll do is I'll sit virtually side by side with you, and we'll pre-underwrite a lot of
Yeah.
these deals together, right? Let's look for red flags, green flags. Let's see where we can identify some early risk, right? If it makes sense to take the next step, then I'll coach you through how to get more information from the broker, from the business owner, whoever's in charge on that side of the sales process. Once you get more information, there's usually like an informational packet called the STIM, the confidential information memo. We'll review that together. That generally has a lot more detailed information, but you're still going to have follow-up questions. From there,
All right.
let's pretend you like the business. We're going to sign what's called an LOI. Think of that as like an early stage offer. Basically just says, hey, I'd like to buy your business. I think for this price, these are some of the assumptions I'm making. If you would like to sell me your business, let's put this in writing. And so that I can have, X amount of time to look at this deal exclusively. But we're basically dating before we consummate the relationship by you selling the business, right?
And so is that when you get to actually look at their books and stuff like that? So you're
Yeah,
like
so the
when you get in
actual
that dating
through
phase?
the book, yeah, getting so after the LOI is signed, you have exclusivity on the deal. Then that's what's called due diligence. That's where that begins, right?
Okay.
You're looking through all the books. You're starting to get the legal documents drafted. You're formalizing certain terms, right? So if you're doing, for example, if you're going to do what's called seller financing, or if you have the business seller finance part of the deal for you, that's where you're going to iron out some of the terms, right? Is there going to be a balloon payment? Is there how much should I pay in interest? How many installments are there going to be? Like what is the term length on this?
Yeah.
Those like final details really get ironed out. They get memorialized in a document, usually called an asset purchase agreement, and then we take you through the closing table.
All right. And so, like, generally speaking, depending on the business and stuff, what would you recommend a good nest egg, or like how would I know that I'm ready to buy a business? I can have all the heart in the world to want to buy a business, but what kind of capital do I have to actually get into?
So it's an interesting question, and it's because there's a lot of ways to go through it because it's almost, the whole business buying experience when we're talking about funding, it's kind of the wild, wild west. There are like certain boxes that are really nice and clean, like SBA loans. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is if you're looking for ways to buy a business, your money gets stretched really far. So I guess like it's a hard question to answer without knowing what your options are. Generally speaking, I think you need at least $1,000 to put into the deal. And it's not necessarily just your down payment. That might be for some due diligence costs. That might be for, some like operating cash post close. If you don't have at least that much, it's going to be kind of a hard path to walk. The key point there is you can leverage your money really far. With SBA loans, you can basically get a 10x return on your cash, right? So if you put down $100,000,
Okay.
you can generally borrow like up to $1 million, right? Your
Okay.
money goes basically twice as far as it would with a rental property, where you're gonna have to put 20% down, right? So that's one thing. There's also the option of pulling in outside investors. There's also the option of seller financing, and
What
there's restrictions and pros and cons with each option, so you have to know how to weigh all that out.
what is I've heard that term a lot, especially on your YouTubes and your Instagram, that buyer financing. What is that?
Yeah. So seller financing, right?
Or seller, my bad. All
Imagine
of
for
it's
a
buyer
second.
financing.
Um, Imagine for a second you're gonna buy a house, right?
Okay.
And so you approach the person that owns that house today and you say, hey, I would like to buy this house and I would like you to give me the money to buy it, right? They're going to tell you to screw off, right? It just doesn't make sense. Now,
Yeah.
here's the crazy thing. In the business buying world, not only is that more palatable, you're more likely to hear a yes to that. It's a very typical part of deals where you're rarely going to get them to finance the whole deal for you, but you will very likely to get them to finance somewhere between 10 and 20% of it.
Okay. So is that so? And this is just me thinking out loud. Is that so that they don't have such a tax burden because you gave them all the money up front? Is that some of the understanding of it, that they're getting the money in pieces in the future?
There are tax benefits to doing that. The reality is most of these businesses that go up for sale are never actually sell. If 10 businesses are listed for sale, 3 of them might sell. And there's a variety of reasons there. So for one, the buyer pool is kind of limited. So I think that's one thing that I'd like to encourage more of, is I think that there can be more qualified buyers. I think there's people that are intimidated from doing this that shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be the scariest thing in the world. Aside from the buyer pool, a lot of the reason that businesses don't sell is because businesses aren't super scalable, right? So they have a ton of key man risk because the person who started the business built the entire operation or all of the operations around what they can do. So now once they hit eject, the whole business is likely to come collapsing around them, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe their books aren't super clean because they're running a bunch of personal expenses through the business, right? Or there could be a million reasons why a business is tough to sell. So because that's tough, the business is hard to sell, the buyers have so much more leverage than they do in other types of purchases. So it's not a matter of the seller wanting to do that necessarily, as much as them having to be a little bit flexible in order to make the deal work.
Yeah. No, because I've heard you talking about that, and like some of the recession proof businesses you've been talking about lately, like things that people could do. So why do you think people don't buy businesses?
I think there's this perception that the only people who can pull off like buying a business are like finance guys who are really good with numbers, or exist like people who already own their own business, or like hedge funds, right? Private equity companies, that kind of thing. The reality couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is, once you buy a business, the buying it is the easy part. Then you have to run it and you have to grow it. And those finance guys that people think this industry is for, they don't have that skill. They have the skill of putting the deal together, right? So if you've spent 10, 15, 20 years in a career, you've already learned how to run a business. You've just been learning how to run somebody else's business. So I can help bridge the gap and help you get to the point where you can feel comfortable buying the business, and then you can take it from there and just run and grow this thing because you already have those.
So my question is, am I buying a business so that it operates and performs better? And here's always my concern is that I buy a business, but all I really did is bought myself a job, right? Like, how do you stop from that, right? Because like if I'm buying a business, right? Like I don't want to buy it so I can run it. I want to buy it so it makes me money, right? Like
Yeah,
I understand that there's like I'm going to have to hire a general manager or a manager for the business to run, and there's some back end stuff. But like, how do I make sure that I'm not buying myself a 9 to 5?
buy a bigger business.
Buy a bigger business.
No, so yes, if you buy a bigger business, it's probably going to have staff in place. But the reality is, in that situation, if you don't plan on operating it every day, that's fine. So you're just going to have to narrow your search criteria to find a business that already has an operator or GM in place. It's not disappearing after you close. Now, keep in
Okay.
mind, at least in the short term, that person, right, is going to have leverage on you. right? Whoever is the GM post close, because it can be a disaster if
Okay.
they leave. So you can't, you have to figure out a way to like standardize their processes so that in this disaster scenario where they walk out the door on you, you can replace them. However,
Yeah.
that is it is going to be don't look for a business that doesn't have an operator, but you think you could hire somebody for, right? Like too much change all at once is just a recipe for disaster. You can absolutely find a business that already has an operator in place. You're going to pay a little bit more for it, but that business is going to be more aligned for what you're looking for.
We do a lot of the same things with our independent store owners. A lot of times when we buy them, because they know the customer, they know the area, we'll keep them on as a store manager or whatever until they're ready to leave. And we kind of know the business and stuff like that. So I understand that part of it. And so, like, those are very stressful conversations trying to buy a business and everything. How do we use, negotiation is a very, very tricky strategy, and it can't always be hard nosed, this or that and everything like that. How do you find a way to bring humor into these conversations with people so that they let their guard down?
So I think the key there is negotiation is stressful and scary because nobody ever does it, right? So it all goes back to A, having somebody who's done it before that can walk you through it, and then B, get on the same side of the table as the person selling the business, right? They want to sell the business. That's why they listed it. You want to buy the business, right? You have the same goal in mind, right? So don't treat the negotiation as you versus them. Treat it as you and them versus any roadblocks that are in the way.
Yeah. So what is your leadership philosophy helping these entrepreneurs or these people buying businesses to guide them through?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've ever seen Master Chef or Kitchen Nightmares or all that, but the
Yeah.
Gordon Ramsay shows, right? There's something pretty cool that I noticed about him, right? So when he's on his shows where he's talking to professional chefs, it tends to be really hard. That's when you see like the douchey version of Gordon Ramsay, right? However, whichever one of his shows where it's like the amateur chefs, he steps into a completely different mode. He is helpful. He offers mentorship. He's very understanding of and if you hear him talk about why he navigates between those two personalities, it's because he expects the professionals to operate a certain way. But with these people who've never done this before, he's just impressed that they're entering the playing field, right? So he wants to help them do better. So when I think of these people who, they're amazing at what they do, right? One guy that I've worked with, he's just crushing it in tech sales, or another guy is a consultant at a big four company. These are very skilled, very intelligent people. I'm just so impressed that they're willing to step out of their comfort zone to try to do this new thing. So I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to have their backs and to help them avoid missteps. For as talented and for as smart as they are, it is a bit of a minefield. So I want to help them navigate that and get them to safety.
No, I got you. What's something that people would be surprised to learn about you?
That's a good question. So if you were to meet me today, right, you would meet the guy who, is maybe the investor or the entrepreneur, somebody who's been in corporate for a long time, somebody who, is kind of like a bro. You probably wouldn't picture me in high school with like super long hair, engaged ears, playing guitar for a metal band. Right? I don't think that's the type of personality that I have now. Big time
Yeah.
musician. Still to this day, like I go to concerts and I just like fantasize about being on stage like I used to when I was younger.
Do you still play?
It's been quite some time. I haven't played, man, at least since my son was born. I think
Yeah. Don't
it's
you think it's time
definitely.
to pass it down to him?
Oh, it's so funny that you say that, right? Because the time will come. Right now, he has a little like mini like kid's toy piano, and he's never a piano player. But once you learn one instrument, the rest come a little bit easier. And so I started learning how to play like the Moana soundtrack on his piano. And now he sees me do that. He's like, "Oh man, that's cool. How do I learn how to do that?"
Yeah, no, kids are so amazing. They teach us so much, especially about leadership. How to have patience, right? So
Yeah.
I always found that interesting that I gained a lot of patience from them. In the military, I didn't have any patience, but with my kids, I always did.
Well,
Those are
kids are a little bit older, right? So like the teen years, I imagine I'd need more patience for them.
yeah. No, my kids are old. They're grown. They're walking the earth on their own. So yeah, it's definitely interesting watching them grow up and just go do their own thing. I find it intriguing. My daughter, my youngest daughter, she turned 18 and she graduated high school, going to college and stuff like that, working and all that. And she's like, Dad, I need money for this and I need money for that. And I was like, listen, I was like, you have to understand that our relationship changed. You became an adult. Like, you asking me for $20 every week to go to the mall to hang out with your friends, that was cool when you were in school and when you were younger. I was like, I solve big issues now. Like, I can't pay my rent, Dad. I can't make my car payments. Like, I'm short. Like, big things, adult things. I was like, not $20 so you can go get food or anything like that. I was like, that's what adult parents do for their adult kids. So it's very interesting to see the look on her face when she's like, all right, like, this is the money train end. All right.
That is a good
Very,
lesson.
very.
Though. How do you, as they're getting to that age, man? How do you trust that they're ready?
How do I trust that they're ready? I think you have to let them fail on their own. I think that too many of us, I've been guilty of it and I probably did it way too long, but you have to let your kids fail in life. I think that that's part of the problem with the generation nowadays is that everybody got a trophy, everybody won, and you never really had that. I've got to do better. I remember playing baseball as a kid and not getting to go to the playoffs, and I was just irate that we didn't get to go. So like, spent hours practicing and hitting and making my dad take me to the batting cages and all that kind of stuff so that I could be better next year. And I think that failing is the greatest thing that we could ever let our children. Now, obviously, it's within boundaries. Like, I'm not trying to get them hurt or injured, but I think that we have to let our kids fail at stuff. If that's going to college and failing, if that's getting a job and failing, and just be their support system there when it happens, and be like, hey, it's okay. Like, you're not going to care about this job 10 years from now that you got to let go of 4 months into when you're 18 years old. Like, no one's even going to look at that on your resume. So you just don't have anything on your resume, so you have to put it on there now. So I think that that's the key with helping your kids is obviously help them as they're growing up, but then also let them fail a little bit, within controlled environment.
I think
And
that's
I would say
yeah.
the hardest part about being a dad with a girl is saying no. It's the hardest word you're ever going to have to say. So it's difficult, but it's possible. It's definitely possible. So
I think failure is like one of the key ingredients to success. But when you're young, when you're in your early 20s, you can't understand that, right? I didn't understand that like a lot of things that I saw as failures in my 20s kind of were just building blocks towards the things I started doing in my 30s. And so I think you just need time to be able to process that.
yeah, no, I think that adversity makes us better people. All of us. Some type of adversity, whatever it is, mental, physical, emotional, it definitely helps us grow as people.
Cheers to that.
It, yeah, thank you. I definitely interested in buying businesses now. You got me all hooked. I'm gonna have to look into this a little more. But
It's the coolest thing. Like the fact that like nobody thinks this is real, and people like you got to remember the people that are selling these businesses, they're at retirement age, right? They're
yeah,
trying to find somebody to offload this business to so that they can retire. They need to sell these things. So
yeah.
the opportunity is here. Sorry, I could talk about that all day. Like there's just so many cool angles to doing that.
No, I agree. And so if somebody wanted to get a hold of you or get in touch with you, how would they do that if they wanted to get you to help them consult on purchasing a business?
Yeah, just hit me up on Instagram, josev.smb. So first name, last initial, not dot SMB for small business. Um, and just DM me, and then we'll get a conversation going. And if I can help, then I'd love to.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Everybody, so make sure you go onto his Instagram, like it, and hit him up if you want any advice on how to buy a small business or maybe a medium or a large business. I don't know. I don't know how big my fans pockets are. Hopefully, it's bigger than mine. But no, that's super cool. I'm trying to think. What? So, how do you own any businesses currently? I'm just curious. Like,
No, so that's funny that is sort of what brought me to Tom into vertical motion. I was
Okay.
I'd started talking to Tom a little bit before I exited the last business. Just didn't know what to do next, right? Like at some point I was on like this executive career journey. There was a little bit of a departure from that. I started buying businesses, I started doing other types of work. And so um I started thinking like what do I do next? And so that's kind of how I found Tom. DM'd him on Instagram. We started a conversation from there. I hopped on a call with Tom, and man, in 10 minutes, it felt like this guy knew me, right? He has this ability to just like get to see the authentic version of you, even if you're trying to hide it, right? So I knew right away this is the guy that I wanted to work with, and I had honestly no idea what the community looked like. I like that one conversation with Tom was what sold me, you know?
Yeah, no, he's definitely he has a way of communicating that necessarily put my finger on it. Don't know if it's definitely authentic, but it's almost like I knew this guy that worked for the Texas State Troopers who was an interrogator, and he used to do interrogations for them. And so he has the same personality as him, and he's just like calm, cool, and collected. And people would just tell him all kinds of stuff, just ridiculous stuff. And I feel like Tom's that way when you have a conversation with him, is that he just opens up to you and you open up to him, and you can really figure out the root problem that you're having and what that is. Nice.
No,
He's a great
he's
mentor. I
really
can't complain.
digging deep. Dude, the first time I met him, I was kind of a mess. Where I was like, dude, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life. And he's like, look, I see you, man. Like, I hear you. Let's work together so
Yeah.
I can help you navigate that. Man, we could talk about this some more, but like, I've made a ton of mistakes, like buying businesses or even other parts of my career that, I guess like I held myself to some standard, right? Like oh man, I'm gonna beat myself up because I probably would run this play a little bit differently if I had to do it again today. And I could talk to Tom about that all day. But no, dude, that was where you're at at the time. That was the decision that felt right. Like who cares? Decisions don't work for me.
No, I agree. Well, Jose, I love you for joining me in my community here on Wisdom, Whiskey, and Wit. I hope that you have more adventures and businesses and helping people within the community and outside of the community of Vertical Motion. I would like to thank you for being a guest on the show.
No, Starsky, thanks so much for having me, man. It was a blast. Cheers.
Not a problem, really. Cheers. Thank you for sipping with us. If today's conversation stirred something in you, whether it's about business buying, negotiation, or just the courage to pivot, stick around. We're building a community of leaders who don't just talk about it, they live it. Make sure you subscribe, drop us a review, and share this episode with someone who's standing in their own crossroads between stability and boldness. Until next time, leadership is distilled, wisdom is shared, and stories are worth savoring. Cheers.